Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
House is in session. I beg that the minutes of the meeting held on Friday, the 12th of December 2025 to be deferred.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the said minutes be deferred. All those in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Announcements by Your Honor the Deputy Speaker. Messages from His Excellency the President, petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
I beg that the said mentioned starting orders be suspended for the day. All those in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 10, sir. In the name of the... 10 minutes? Okay.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the House until 10:45.
The question is that the House be suspended until 10:45. All those in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. This House now stands suspended until 10:45 a.m. Thank you.
substantially improved the condition and benefits of policemen who were detectives, with allowances ranging from $1,961 to $2,269 per month being given to those officers to allow them to carry out their job in this country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, they would have rationalized it, and previously there was a duty allowance and a detective allowance, but these allowances that have all been subsumed in the criminal investigation allowance, given the numbers that I just referred to, and making it different. I am not deaf, and I know that there is a need to be able to look at those who are in uniform, and I'm assuring them that theirs will be dealt with in the regrading exercise, which is virtually coming to an end, and I expect during 2026 that those matters will be remedied. Equally, sir, we created the post of a senior constable, and on the 3rd of September this year, just under 300 persons would have been appointed with the designation of senior constable. And I know, simply because even a number of officers who work in the precincts of this Parliament were very proud to show the new designation on their chests, as well as smiling at the little increase also that would have made their pockets a little fuller than it had been before. These are police officers who were serving for 20 years or more, and we felt that it was important to be able to ensure that they have recognized the experience that they have garnered, and with the requisite experience, obviously the requisite pay to show our appreciation for their continued hard work in these areas. In addition, we would have also made provision for the special constables. I think it was about 40? How many of them were? 46 of special constables who, with 3 years or more, have immediately become police constables. This is a government that is listening to people and seeing people and feeling their circumstances, and felt very strongly that there was no need for them to continue only as special constables, because they knew and in many instances had gone through the same drills as police constables. Their initial training is less, but working in the job for the 3 years or more, and in this particular instance, many of them even had more than 10 years. They were therefore more than equipped to become police constables in Barbados, and we are happy for them to have made that transition. In addition to that, over the course of the last few years, because of the increases in the minimum wage, the national and sectoral minimum wage order, that would have meant an increase in fees being paid to island constables. Island constables, when we came into office, I don't think they were even receiving the national minimum wage. In 2021, when we introduced it, they went to $8.50, and that was a mistake, and it was corrected almost immediately, because then it realized within 3 months they really should have been getting the $9.25 per hour and not the $8.50. That correction was made, and then of course they have gone to the new amount, which is now $11.43 in accordance with the minimum wage order, which was put in place from the 1st of June. And may I say, as it relates to this 2% increase, let us go back to the words of the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central when he delivered the budget this year. He made it absolutely clear that the minimum wage, like the national insurance insurable earnings limit, will be increased every year by 2%, without prejudice to the fact that the minimum wage board will review the adequacy of the wages every 3 years. So in the same way, and most people, I'm learning more and more that there's a lot that is done in this country that the majority of Barbadians do not know. For decades, we have been adjusting the pension of the NIS every year in January by 2% without prejudice to any further decisions that are made periodically to right-size those adjustments. We are doing the same thing with the national minimum wage. And I find it curious because this is a country, before with this government, chose to introduce the minimum wage. No government before, neither Barbados Labour Party nor Democratic Labour Party, felt it possible to introduce a minimum wage in this country, because they told you that if you introduce a minimum wage, it's going to break the businesses and all the shops are going to close down and larger enterprises going to close down. Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, we have had a national minimum wage in this country now for 4.5 years and nothing has imploded. So when persons now want to come and ridicule the efforts that have been made to be able to right size and to put in place, would I like it to be more? Of course I would. And we're going to continue to make Barbados stronger and make this economy stronger so that we can continue to make those wages and to ensure that they are truly livable wages as we go forward. And that is the commitment that I give you in this chamber, recognizing that this government's record on improvement of terms and conditions of workers, as well as public servants in particular, has been better than almost any other government since independence in this country. And you know why this stands out, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Because we've done this while being in an IMF program for 6 of the 7.5 years. There are others who would say, because I'm in an IMF program, I can't give you a wage increase. Because I'm in an IMF program, I can't establish a national minimum wage. Because I'm in an IMF program, I could not do the changes that we did to the police and the various other people that we were doing. We have been the opposite. We have said that because we were in an IMF program, we recognize that the most important foundation is people protection and people promotion. And that has been core to the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, otherwise known as the BERT program. So I am very, very clear that this is something that we are proud of. With respect to watchmen, they work for 12 hours and their session increase. They have gone from $117.60 to $137.60 for every 12-hour session. In other words, an increase of $19.56 virtually for every day that they go to work, which when multiplied by the 5 or 6 days that they're working is a substantive increase. Similarly, we have also seen the increase in fees being paid to board chairmen and members of board committees and commissions. All of these things had not been increased for over 15 years. We have also increased the stipends for the summer internship program, which is before us, and those are people, every year the government of Barbados helps take in people from secondary schools or community college or the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute or university students. And those had not been increased since 2007 for 18 years. And we have now brought that back into some level of decency. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I spoke in the budget in 2024, I spoke about the importance of a long leave policy for the nursing profession and also a number of other matters pertaining to personal and leave days. Those are now being finally completed. With respect to the long leave policy for the nursing profession, I anticipate that we will have a meeting in the next few weeks. We have more or less settled what is there, but we want, before final announcement, to be able to communicate and work with the Nurses Association to make sure that we're all on the same page. With respect to the teachers, I took the liberty of speaking to both the General Secretary of the Barbados Union of Teachers and the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union in the last 24 hours, and I've indicated that the government is now in a position to bring this long and vexatious matter to closure, recognizing that there will obviously be need to put in place the long-anticipated reintroduction of long leave for teachers, and we want to do it from 2026. And therefore, I expect that the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Public Service, and the Ministry of Finance will have their initial meeting before the end of this year so that we can bring to closure what has been regrettably a period of absence of access to that. I suspect we will find a new name for it. Long leave tends to have implications from a colonial era with leave passage. We are not looking to do that. We want a new name for it, and the government has signified to the Ministry of Education, and hopefully we will say to the unions, let us come up with a name that recognizes that this is a case of persons needing respite and recharge to avoid burnout, particularly where there is that long, continuous exchange dealing with people's burdens and problems. In some instances, and in other instances, just dealing with the reality of people coming at you all day, every day, for a continuous period of time. People are human, and people need sometimes to step back, recharge, and come again. You may want to say the same thing for politicians sometimes too, except that they may get permanent leave and not long leave, especially when you don't behave properly. The bereavement and compassionate leave is also being settled shortly. So I anticipate that these things will make a huge difference to the continued type of work that we are doing in the country to make lives easier. At the same time, I say simply to all of us, and that means all of us in here, as well as all of the public service, we are living in a very challenging world. And if ever there was a time for all of us to step up to the plate and to put more in to ensure that our shoulders go further to the wheel, it is now. Because nobody owes us a living. And the truth is that more and more, the major conversations that are taking place internationally are about war and rumors of war. We are already in a man-made war with nature, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And our country must not be lulled into a false sense of security because of the fact that the government has been able to shield the majority of Barbadians from the worst of the ravages of the climate crisis thus far, from the worst of the ravages of the supply disruption. We have had consequences, but it is not as bad as it could otherwise be. From the worst of the ravages of the cost of living increases, and today is not a day to go through all of that, but we have tried our best to be able to shield Barbadians as best we can. The reality, however, is that there are some things that may be beyond our capacity, particularly as a small state, as a small open economy, and in those circumstances, as we saw even recently with the OECD, the removal of policy flexibility and options is something that will continue to be developed. I will speak further on these issues over the course of the next few months because it is a continuous reality that we face, and we need to be aware that when outside is overcast, you cannot go outside in a pair of slippers and with no umbrella and expect not to get wet. That is the bald reality. We are living in a completely different world. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with these few words, I really ask this honorable chamber to join me in being able to bring some joy to the lives of those who are public servants in this country and who have been awaiting their appointments for some period of time. Next week is Christmas, and I hope that this will bring some smiles and a little cheer on people's faces, recognizing that the government will work with them. At the same time, we will ask people to step up to the plate and ensure that the things that we must do as a government to continue to deliver services to the people of this country continue to improve. I've said over and over that we must do the large transformational things while remaining focused on the small things that literally can cause people to be irritated and can affect how people are able to cope in their daily lives. We are not perfect, but I'm satisfied that this government has been doing a good job in making a difference to the lives of the people. This is the same class of persons who in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018 looked for 1 cent, 10 cents, 21 cents, $10, $20, $100 in increases, and nothing came because of an inability of the Democratic Labour Party to see people, hear people, and feel people in the public service to ensure that they continue to be valued and continue to understand that they were also to be the beneficiaries of any kind of benefit that we have in any kind of growth in this country. Mercifully, this country has now seen 17 straight quarters of economic growth with unemployment at its lowest ever. And while we cannot play fast and loose with this economy, we have done enough to ensure that we are growing and that as we grow, we carry people along with us. The Solidarity Allowance earlier this year was a mechanism by which we wanted to say thank you, and we did so, not just to the workers of the country, but to all Barbadians who helped us, because we said early, share the burden, share the bounty. And that will continue to be the philosophy of the administration that I lead as the government of Barbados today. With those few words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time. Thank you.
Beg to second that.
Leader of the opposition.
I thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think the government has become used to hearing me say in reply that I take good notes. Today, particularly, has been no exception. And it is good that the Honourable Prime Minister has come to the Parliament in the hope of rescuing a government at this 11th hour with this amendment to the Constitution. Today I am going to be perhaps more technical and academic than political, but you, sir, will be disappointed if I'm not political. But since it is an amendment to the Constitution, I am obliged to say that I will be academic insofar as we are, well, insofar as the government is amending the Constitution. And I think the public is always due some explanation as to the significance of constitutional amendments as opposed to mere legislation, which tends to be the business of the day from Tuesday to Tuesday, and in recent times, including Fridays. Now, I want to begin where the Honourable Prime Minister ended, and before the Honourable Prime Minister uttered the words in closing, I was reflecting that the speech following on the notice of the amendment sounded pre-election, but this is a body that passes law under the Constitution, and strictly speaking, issues of electioneering do not dominate in here. But permit me to quote the Honourable Prime Minister when she said that today's measure, and I quote, will bring joy to public servants. And where's that joy? That joy, succinctly stated, involves an amendment to the Constitution to give permanent appointment to those persons who have acted in positions for 3 years or more. Now, I think the Honourable Prime Minister may have impliedly admitted that what is happening today is no reinvention of the wheel, since the Public Service Act long recognized that a person should have something of a legitimate expectation for permanence after 3 years in the position. And I think the Honourable Prime Minister would have pointed to Section 13, subsection 7, as the benchmark provision which protects persons who have been in the public service for some 3 years. Yes, 2007 legislation. Now, if I accuse the Honourable Prime Minister of ending on a political note, I do so with some, I think, justification. And if one feels that one is bringing joy to people, well, one is entitled to that joy. But, or to that claim, to that boast. But when law and politics intersect, sometimes problems are not always resolved. And I will today, Your Honor, reflect on those areas within the public service that may not have had what the Honourable Prime Minister may hope is entire resolution to a crisis that may have visited persons who have not had security of tenure. And that is what, it is about that the Honourable Prime Minister may today rejoice or boast that some persons have not had security of tenure, they've worked for 3 years or more, and as I said, that boast, that rejoicing may well be justified if you're bringing security of tenure to the lives of people. However, the question will remain to be asked, has joy been brought to the entire public service? Because there's still some rough edges within the public service to be smooth. There is still some discontent within the public service. There is still much discontent within the public service. And so a parliament would not want to appear today to be providing an entire panacea for all the problems that exist just beneath the surface of this glossy constitutional amendment. I quote the Prime Minister again, the Honourable Prime Minister again, of having said, "We are the first government to introduce minimum wage." I think the Honourable Member for Christchurch West has heard me prior here to credit him for having been the first voice in here, in spite of the presence of his colleague from the constituency of St. Peter. I sat there one day and I heard him very emotionally. I was surprised, to be honest. I said, well, where is this man going today? And against the tide of his colleagues, he pressed the case for minimum wage. And that is the origin of minimum wage thrusts within this government. I will credit that honourable member for Christchurch West for having been the birthplace of minimum wage legislation in this government. And he will not blush. He will hear the truth, and he will acknowledge the truth. And I do so not to embarrass the honourable member for St. Peter. All we do today is to speak the truth. And so I pay tribute today to the honourable member for Christchurch West I know he will be frustrated, though, that it has taken this long. I know he will be frustrated even that that progressive thought would have entered his mind some 4 years ago, and it is only 4 years later that he will see his government taking this initiative. To him, I say congratulations. To his government, I say I am sorry that it took this long. But on the eve of an election, better late than never. He maintains a poker face while I say this, but I want him on the inside to accept my commendation. Now, the Honourable Prime Minister, in what I described as something that seems rather pre-election, and that is not a criticism, that is an objective assessment as to a political season that may be upon us. And this is not to concede that all is well. All is really not well. And I've said a few minutes ago, Your Honor, that there are a few rough surfaces beneath the glossy content of today's amendment. The Honourable Prime Minister promised, and I quote, to settle with the nurses. The Honourable Prime Minister promised in relation to the teachers. And I quote, we are bringing the long and vexatious matter of long leave with the teachers to closure. And the Honourable Prime Minister wants me to complete this speech. And I intend to do so. And then the Honourable Prime Minister, from the nurses to the teachers, oh, hallelujah, all embracing, went to the police officers. And those police officers were told that all about which they have complained over the last many years will be coming to some good result. Again, there are still rough edges to be smooth, or let me put it differently. There is still some turbulence beneath the amendment. There is still much turbulence beneath the promises made by the Honourable Prime Minister. And I'm not criticizing the sincerity, or I'm not accusing the Prime Minister, the Honourable Prime Minister, of not being sincere in these promises. The Honourable Prime Minister may well be sincere, but it heralds the season of election. And are we happy for this season? Well, those who benefit ought to be happy for the season, and more than the season, if these promises are of substance, more than being happy for the season, they will be happy for the promises. The country awaits these promises. But I will come to legal technicality shortly. And while the Honourable Prime Minister, Your Honour, spoke to the nurses, yes, the nurses asked us some time ago to focus less on the police officers and to agitate for them. And today we are happy to report that our various agitations have met a government which is now willing to listen to agitations, albeit in this season. And I speak not of the season of Advent with a capital A, I speak of the season of the Advent common A of something that is pending, an election. An election clearly is pending. Do not be distracted though by the election. The people will do what they must do when that time comes. we today have come here to focus on the promises. About the police officers, I will, in the presence of the Honourable Prime Minister, say to her and her government that the question of allowances paid to detectives may have created some turmoil within the police service. And I must report this. And it is not any opposition to an allowance paid to detectives, but it is to press the case for the uniformed police officers. And I think the Prime Minister, the Honourable Prime Minister, acknowledged this herself when she promised that their matter will be dealt with. What becomes obvious, though, is that the government seems to enjoy ad hoc or piecemeal attention to problems within the public service. But the point needs to be made, and a message needs to be sent to the Honourable Prime Minister and to the government, that the uniformed police officers do not mind if the hard-working detectives receive a uniform allowance, but they have told us that within the investigation of crime, that they are no less participant in the investigation of crime. In fact, they have told me to report that they are often the first responders. They have told me to report that in many ways they are on the front line when crime occurs, and certainly when violent crime occurs. They are no less participant than their colleagues. And if any injury has been done to the service, injury has been done by a government that separates the interests of a joint police service. A uniformed police officer is no less a police officer than a detective. There are brothers equal in the struggle. There are equal brothers and sisters in the struggle. And therefore, the opposition on behalf of all police officers will continue to make the case for equal treatment of all officers. And that when good is done, when allowances are paid to detectives, some equal benefit must be given to the uniform section of the Barbados Police Service. But the issue does not end there. These allowances that are paid and that become payable after many, many promises, they do not, unfortunately, factor in to the payment of pension or the calculation of pension on retirement. There are those who have greater expertise in these matters of pension, entitlement, and so on, but that is my information. And that the officers feel that what has been described and paid as an allowance ought to have been paid as a salary increase. So that when an officer, for example, retires after 42 years, that allowance ought to have been a salary increase which contributes towards the quantum of his pension. And that's why I say to the Honourable Prime Minister, there is still some turbulence beneath the promises. There is still some turbulence beneath the proposals. And so the members of the Barbados Police Service would wish to state that today's initiative, or recent initiatives, certainly in terms of the payment of the allowance, has not solved the problem entirely. Some have gone as far as to say that it may be creating two police services. And that is a matter of some considerable regret when we have officers being treated differently by a government on the basis of the clothing that they wear. Some in uniform, some in plain clothes. Does that then not press the case for what we have always proposed in relation to the police service? The police service needs to be modernized. The police service needs to be modernized beyond colonial appearances. And I hate to use the word colonial because it is emotive and it normally conveys messages that are best avoided. In other words, there are a lot of people in this country who like to walk around using these terms, colonial, and when you really subject them to close scrutiny, they are as colonial as the colonialism that they claim to oppose. So that when I say colonial, I mean old-fashioned, an organization that is still nestled in the bosom of antiquity. And that is why this opposition Democratic Labour Party, constructively and objectively calls for the modernization, the genuine modernization of the Barbados Police Service. And if the Barbados Police Service is to be genuinely and properly modernized, there needs to be emphasis in two areas of that police service. The two P's, pay and promotion. In terms of pay, the Barbados Police Service is treated most unfairly. When one looks at the nature of the job, one must concede that a young constable, male or female, who is exposed to the most violent aspects of this society really needs to be taking home more money than they do. And I'm not going to embarrass anyone by making reference to the quantum of a young police officer's salary, but I ask this government, beneath the surface of public debate, to urgently attend to salaries within the police service, and particularly salaries at the middle and lower levels of the Barbados Police Service. That is a matter of some urgency. That is a matter of unsatisfactory pay that is made to police officers in this country. So I describe that as the first P, the first of two Ps. The second P, obviously, is promotion, that of promotion. Now, it is probably known that the voice that is mine is perhaps one of the best known voices, and I try to be modest, on the issue of promotions within the Barbados Police Service. And some years ago, a few years ago, a very short time ago, I sat with the Honourable Member for St. Joseph and came to some agreement on that matter that had occupied the courts between 2012 and I think it was 2022. We were before the court for 1 decade. That is not a secret. And I want to say that I practice my profession, Your Honor, without regard to political considerations. I am extremely loyal to the canons of my profession and my duties to the court, to the public, to the profession, and to my client. And I never compromise the interests of a client. It matters not to me in which waters I am sailing otherwise, my duty to my client always is paramount. And I was so pleased to resolve that matter after 10 decades. I beg your pardon, 10 years. I'm not that old. 10 years of struggle. I said all that to say, Your Honor, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that case really reminded me of what I have always felt, that the issue of promotion in the police service needs urgent modernization. And I will say what is no longer a secret, that over the years, promotion has not been entirely dependent on merit. And this needs to be said in a public place, a place as public as this Parliament. I do not understand, I really do not understand how police officers endure lives beyond 10 years of service without promotion. I do not understand how police officers in this country endure years of service exceeding 20 years without promotion. What manner of patriotism is that? It is patriotism of the highest order. And he will permit me to say this, that it must be cold comfort and little consolation to a police officer that after 40 years of service, he is told that he is a senior constable. Now, that is not to highlight his situation, but that is to highlight a crisis within an important public department called the police service. I make bold to say that according to any rule of fairness, and look, I do not know, it matters not. One must be indifferent as to the personality of the officers. Who they are does not matter. But we make bold to take the position that you cannot serve in a Barbados police service for 40 years without promotion. Something is not right. And so, since the government has failed and refused and neglected, that's the phraseology that lawyers use when we are drafting documents. Failed, refused, and neglected to attain to this, a new government will have to do it. A new government will have to restructure and reorganize the police service and to pay attention to the question of promotion. That there must be, and to do it legislatively, not by executive interference, because I often come in here and speak about Section 8 of the Police Act. Section 8 insulates the police service from governmental or executive control. But by way of legislation, there ought to be a new and a brand new Police Act which gives guarantee to merit within the Barbados Police Service. That it is not to be dependent on who likes you or who dislikes you. There has to be some room for merit within this important department, within this important public department. That a young man or a young woman who joins the Barbados Police Service must not exist nervously as to whether he or she will find professional fulfillment. When a man or a woman stays in a job for 10 years, that is commitment. When a man or a woman stays in a job for 20 years, that is commitment. What is the reward? Is the reward that of only a salary, which in any event is too small? The reward ought to be some expectation, and as we lawyers say, some legitimate expectation that by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. And the Barbados Police Service, under this government and past governments, has not been well treated in this country. And I think has not been well treated. And they say you should not reflect negatively on those who have passed on, even if they've made contribution. But I still today challenge an earlier assertion made by a former prime minister that the police service, well, it was a force at the time, that the police force is not special. I've always challenged that. Even in his life, I challenged it. And I say to him posthumously and to this government that the police service is special. It is special. There is no other public service that renders the nature and quality of service like the police service, unless, of course, one wishes to extend it to teaching and nursing. And that is why the people of this country, in collective embrace, have always spoken with high regard of the police service, the nursing service, and the teaching service. Those are the three branches of social and professional nobility within the public service. But they've not been treated well. And I'm not here this morning to be patronizing. I am here to encourage the government and to say that any future government will give highest priority to these three branches of public service: police, nurses, and teachers. Those are, in a sense, those are the true guardians, the true and strict guardians of our heritage, our human heritage. I think I've mentioned the nurses and the inadequacy of pay. I've mentioned the police and the inadequacy of pay. And I've mentioned the police in terms of the unfairness of elevation within the Barbados Police Service. There needs to be a fairer system. Teachers. Let me do this by way of anecdote, Your Honor. One day I was invited to a certain school, secondary school, to give a talk to a class. And at the end of the hour, I was so physically tired, trying to retain the attention of the students. And I found that one of the ways of succeeded in so doing was to call their names, ask them their name, remember the name, and address them by that name. And having succeeded in remembering the names, the interaction took place between them and me. And at the end of it, the end of the hour, you were so physically tired. And I said to one of the teacher who had invited me, but if you go home and you're not physically tired, maybe you're not doing your job. Because I found it extremely draining. And I think the Honourable Member for St. Thomas responds favorably, I hope and expect, because she understands the experience of being a teacher. And it is not, that experience taught me that it is not an easy job, and I'm not being patronizing. But has this society seen it fit to reward its teachers? Has this society seen it fit to acknowledge the work of those who sit in, as I think the Latin term, locus in parentis? That is the place of a teacher. The teacher becomes a parent, I think, between 9 and 3, and of course, when the parent doesn't get for them, between 9 and 5. So the parent the teacher really is the parent. And if we are reluctant to treat teachers as teachers ought to be treated, let us remind ourselves that they are also parents and treat them as parents as well, not biological, but they become our children's parents when we disappear from the school gate, having deposited them there. Has this society treated them well? Well, I am happy for the presence of the Honourable Prime Minister and to say directly to her that there are still several teachers and public servants who have not received their acting allowance. They're suffering burnout. Last week I accused the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central of being obviously the hardest working minister in this government, and I would expect that that message will be sent to him to remind him that beneath the glossy appearance of today's exercise, there are some unhappy teachers and public servants out there who are waiting to receive from this government their acting allowance. Many of them are suffering burnout. And I understand the experience of burnout, having spent an hour with those children, those teenage children one day. We understand. We understand, we know, and I will not allow the debate to digress, Your Honor, but there are a lot of teachers who are taking lunch to school for children. For years, the Honourable Member for St. Thomas utters, for years. And that will need to come to an end, not because we are challenging the generosity of teachers, but we are saying that the people of this country that we hear has had 17 consecutive quarters of growth. If that is the case, if we are in an economy that is so buoyant, no child should be going to school and staying at school in a state of hunger. And since this government has been reluctant to make any promise in relation to the welfare of our thousands of children during the school hours, a new government makes that commitment to protect our little children in a national breakfast program across all the primary and secondary schools of this country, so that no child shall reach midday in a state of hunger and no teacher will have to bring lunch to school to feed a child. And I'll say this, Your Honor, from the rich to the poor, they shall sit together and eat together, and there will be no stigma attached to one who needs it from those who may only want it. They shall sit and dine together, and there shall be no distinction between the two. But this is so easy to do in a buoyant economy. In a buoyant economy, it must be possible to feed the little children of this country at a large breakfast table, and I'm going to use a term that this government likes to use, in a retrofitted physical plant. It must be easy to build portions of a school and let the children dine together. How pleasant a start to the day would that be? You sing your hymns, you read your Bible lessons, and this is not old-fashioned. This is about imparting values. You hear the principal give his report, and look, our schools could become such better places by this creative thought. But the public now knows that that creative thought springs from the Democratic Labour Party, and nobody owns an idea. Nobody owns an idea. But that is a proposal made by this Democratic Labour Party against a government that has failed, refused, and neglected to do these things by the good children of this country. And so those are the responses to what I call the political aspects of the Honourable, yes, yes. Those are my responses to what I call the political aspects of the Honourable Prime Minister's presentation here this morning. I may well bore you now with a disquisition on the law. Let us condescend more strictly to what the government has come to do today. The government has come to guarantee appointment, and that is to say permanent appointment to public servants in this country. Now, it is fine to come to a parliament and to amend the constitution to give security of tenure to public servants. And that is noble. But when you do these things, you must have regard to present context, and you must have regard to history. Now, I have said, Your Honor, that the public service is not without turbulence. And it is a turbulence that has been visited upon that public service by this government. This government has planted at the top of several public service departments, and indeed ministries, but let us say departments. Let us stay with departments. Persons who are not within the tradition of public servants. I'm not going to name any, neither am I going to shame any. I am not going to identify any department. What I will do is speak the case for those persons in those various departments, in those various ministries, who may have endured a period of frustration, and frustration in terms of their elevation according to the principles of legitimate expectation. We all know of what I speak. I beg your pardon, sir. Now, there is a new creature on the landscape of the public service called a person who is there by contract. By contract. I have never seen one of the contracts myself, but one of the features of a contract is that it must have parties and it must be signed to take effect. I do not know with whom these contracts are made by the persons planted at the top of these government departments. Maybe it is with the Attorney General. I do not speak with authority, and I do not speak liberally when I do not have authority. But the point needs to be made to Barbadians and to the persons in this parliament who are not trained in law. Maybe there's some who are trained in law who I will have to teach as well. But public service has never been dependent on contract. That has not been the history and the nature of public service. In the old days, when a young man left school, university perhaps, he had a choice. He said, or a young lady, they would say, well, I'm going to try my hand in the private sector. Out there seems exciting. Perhaps I'll own a car or a house quicker. Perhaps prosperity will visit my life much earlier. But it involves its hazards. It is a more, perhaps, volatile environment. It has its excitement. You may run into the wrong boss or the wrong employer or the wrong company, or indeed, equally, you may run into the right company, and prosperity could visit you within 10 years. And the public service was not attractive in that way. What made the public service attractive was security of tenure. that when you became a public servant and you enjoyed appointment, permanent employment, as they say, you were set for life. And you were going to get your car, you were going to get your house, and you were going to get a good life. But it involved patience. Whereas your counterpart, your schoolmate who went into the private sector, he or she may have achieved things a little quicker. But the advantage of being in the public service was that you had security of tenure. And that was a beautiful thing. And that security of tenure made not only for a good personal experience, but it made for a well-ordered society. One of the good inheritances of the British presence in this place has been an amazing sense of organization. They kept good records. And there certainly was a public service that performed and delivered in spite of the criticisms that you would have heard over the years. We took so much for granted. For example, it is only when I went to university that I discovered that we were one of the countries in the Caribbean that got mail delivery. Other countries in this Caribbean did not have mail delivery. And that is something we took so for granted, the postman. Other countries did not have a postman. So here was an aspect of public service that we took for granted, but here was an aspect of public service that made for a well-ordered society. As I said, the British left us an inheritance of organization and order. And that is not to be colonial, that is to be truthful and realistic. Parish boundaries, for example, and embracing the Anglican Church, where I went this morning. I commend this lifestyle to many of these parliamentarians. I commend that. Do it once a week. Do it once a week and y'all will find that your relations improve. Your human relations will improve. But I was speaking of the marriage between the Anglican Church and the state. As you know, Attorney General, disestablishmentation, the disassociation between the Anglican Church and the state took place in 1969. But that association between state and church left, again, healthy organization, certainly in terms of records. There's some people in here who would have had baptism certificates. You don't get them now, but such was the marriage between church and state. Such was organization. Such was the healthy organization of this society. But let me not digress, Your Honor. That is to say that our public service worked, and our public service worked in tandem with the churches in Barbados. Again, I don't like to focus on my own experience, but my first school was located in a Moravian church building, Grace Hill. And these are things we take for granted. But I say all of that, Your Honor, to remind this country that we have been favored and blessed with, highly favored, with social organization, if not political organization, social organization, and we owe to those who have gone before, we owe it to a public service. So let us come back to that public service. A person could go in there, as I said, he chose when he left school, private sector public service. If he went into the public service and became a public servant, it was not on the basis of contract. It was on the basis of something called status. A public servant was there by status. And it was not by contract. The fellow who went into the private sector, he signed a contract, or they gave him a letter, and that letter constituted his contract. In the public service, it was not like that. The public servant was not an employee in the way that a public servant was not an employee in the way that a private sector person was an employee. There were two different natures of tenure. One was called status, that's the public servant. The private sector fellow, he was there by service. He gave service to his employer. The public servant, he enjoyed the status of public servant. Very prestigious, too, back in the day, 50s and 60s and 70s up to the 80s. But I cannot admire what this government has done within the last 7 years. That it has planted at the top, at the uppermost reaches of the public service, a kind of servant, a kind of person who is not there by virtue of status, who is not within the tradition of public service. That person is now there by contract. And that person comes in, and I believe I'm told that they're given 3 or 4 years of a contract, presumably with the state. As I've said, I don't speak with the authority as to the signatories to that contract. One assumes it is with the Attorney General. But here you have a public service of persons who serve or who exist according to status, being led by someone who is not of status, but someone who is there by virtue of contract. I'm not going to use the word vulgarity in relation to that contract, but it is of a different kind. Now, one of the virtues of public service, one of the virtues of status has been security of tenure. Not only security of tenure, but independence. And it is independence that often guarantees, or I beg your pardon, it is security of tenure that tends to guarantee independence. In other words, and I've said this before and I'm going to say it again to the public service in this country, the politician, the minister is not your employer. He is not your boss. You're not answerable to him. You're answerable to your head of department or further up to your permanent secretary. The minister is there for the purpose of policy. So that when you hear ministers saying that they went into a public service department to see how things are going in there and to, none of that. Don't do that again, please. The ministry, the persons in there, the public servants, and they are not your employees. Please stay out of the people's places of work. Stay out of them. Stay out of them. The head of department or the permanent secretary is that person within the line of employment. The minister is there for policy purpose. A lot of people don't know it, Honourable Member. That's why I'm saying that a lot of people, you'd be amazed, Honourable Member for St. Thomas, a lot of your colleagues do not know that. And since you forced me to make that declaration, I'll make it. A lot of your colleagues seem not to understand that the people in the public service are not their employees. But we were talking about the virtues that attain the professional lives of public servants. Security of tenure and independence. And those are two virtues that must be protected. And they must be protected against a government, and indeed any government, and we're in the reign, and I use the word reign deliberately, we're in the reign of this government. And public service and the traditions of public service may have been undermined by the deliberate policy of this government of planting contractual workers at the head of public service. What has that done to the public service? Has it demoralized the public service? Has it frustrated the legitimate ambitions of persons in the middle and close to the top who felt that they were destined for leadership? And has this government unfairly implanted those persons at the head of a public service and to destroy the integrity and the dignity of the public service? I want to bring public condemnation to the existence or to the practice of planting contractual persons at the top of public service. As I said, it has undermined ideas, notions of independence, or actual independence. It has undermined it. And certainly, another aspect to that practice of contractual engagement at the head of the public service, the department may well lose its independence. Because if you have a head of a department dependent on a government for renewal of that contract, the independence is gone. And certainly the head of department is responsible for the culture of that department. Does that department become slavish to ministerial rule? Or does that department remain or maintain its integrity as a public service department and functions as such? Let me explain that further. A public servant is appointed by the head of state, not by a minister. We have to explain this to Barbadians because a lot of young people may be of the view, and they may hold this view with justification, that if you want to get into the public service, you go to your minister. Now, you can probably do that with the statutory corporations. But certainly the established public service appointment is done by the head of state, the president, formerly the Governor General, after the process has gone through the Public Service Commission. In my day, and in an earlier time, you went up to services commissions and you signed up. And thousands of public servants became public servants without any contact having been made with a politician, with a minister. And that is a demonstration of how the service was constituted and how the service worked. Now, when you begin to implant people by way of contract on a public service, what does that do to that practice, to that time-honored practice? What does that do to the independence of the public service? What does that do to hurt the insulation of the public service from the political directorate? And that's the point that needs to be made. The public service must remain insulated from the political directorate in terms of day-to-day control. A public servant is entitled to independence. He's there to do a job. And as they always say, he will do that job in spite of who constitutes the cabinet, the government. He will do his job and he will do it the same way. And at the uppermost levels, he will advise permanent secretary, they will advise the minister. And the permanent secretary will take advice or instruction from the minister in terms of implementation of policy, or in terms of policy. Beg your pardon? No, if you have a legitimate question, I'll answer you. But if you reject the opportunity to learn something, even as Attorney General, well, so be it. But you're on your way out. Now, so that the public needs to know within the context of this debate, in spite of the protestations from the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, who's learning today, and seems upset that he has to be learning even at his advanced age, but I'll teach him. I'll volunteer to teach you. Don't protest. I know you only have a few weeks here, so spend the time usefully. I'm going to help you. No, he was disrespectful by asking me a question while sitting. Keep them quiet, sir. So that, Your Honor, that is the legal status of the public servant. And I'm accusing this government today of having done injury to the legal status of the public servant. That is the sum total of what I'm saying. That the public service, the independence of the public service has been undermined by the government by its practice of creating employment at the top of the service by creating employment based not on status, but based on contract. And having contracted those persons, the government now has direct control over those persons. No offense to them, But this is the consequence of the practice. It has direct control, and those persons are not seen within the public as having that independence, as having that professional independence, as having that opportunity to give of their professional best based on their training. But indeed, they are seen as instruments of the government. They can regard that statement as they feel, as they wish to, but that is the position. In a sense, they are seen as extensions of the cabinet. That cabinet disposition, let me put it that way. Cabinet disposition, governmental disposition, political disposition, they are seen as being subject to political disposition. And indeed, quite often they say the same thing as the minister, in advance of the minister. And sometimes when they speak first, the minister endorses what they have said. And when the minister speaks, they endorse what the minister has said. And that is why I criticize the practice of hiring people at the heads of departments based not on the traditional status, but based on contract. That is not right. Most dangerously, that practice has now extended itself to an arm of the state. And this is an area that is awkward for me. But I have come here to speak on principle. I have a job to do on behalf of the public. I have to speak on principle. And I may not shout at this point, but this practice of hiring or appointing judges on the basis of contract is wrong. And it is probably unconstitutional. Yes, AG, it is unconstitutional. I say here, and I say it all the time, and I say it for good reason. I speak always of the three arms of the state according to the doctrine of separation of powers, that those three arms of the state are entitled to separate and independent existence, except that we are in a political and constitutional arrangement and culture in which the members of the cabinet are also members of the parliament. In other words, there is what we call an incestuous connection between the parliament and the cabinet. I always give the example that the United States has pure separation of powers. The members of the cabinet are completely and entirely separate from the parliament because the members of the cabinet are not members of the parliament. In our system, they are incestuously connected one between the other. In other words, parliamentarians, whether here or in the other place, are members of the cabinet. So to that extent, we do not have strict separation of powers, except, Your Honor, that according to Lord Diplock, in the case Hines and we are still Westminster. All these constitutions are Westminster constitutions, and therefore separation of powers doctrine is integral or fundamental within these constitutions. So in spite of that incestuous connection, the cabinet and the parliament are still separate. But we recognize the incestuous connection between those two. But that third arm, there cannot be any connection between the judiciary and the cabinet or the judiciary and the parliament. They cannot be. Because the judiciary is the one place that defends the rights of the citizen, and is supposed to do so fairly. And it is supposed to do so whether he is a B, a D, whatever is his race, whatever is his class, whatever is his creed, a person expects that he will go, or opinion, political opinion, he expects that he can go to the court and receive a fair trial, receive fair treatment. And that is why it is so important that the court should be insulated from political control. And that is why you give the judges security of tenure, as you give to your other public servants. But in the case of a judge, it is critical. It is extremely critical. You can't have a man going before a court that is influenced by the executive, and by the executive I mean the cabinet. You cannot do that. So that, I often use the word sacred in here. The court is a sacred place. It is a sacred place, and the courts must be presided over by persons who are not subject to political control. And I am saying that if you put a judge on contract, if you appoint a judge by way of contract, the government continues, by the nature of that contractual relationship, to express or to exercise control over that person. You give him a year's contract, maybe he wants 2. You give him 2, maybe he's coming back begging for a 3rd one. No, doesn't function like that. When a judge is appointed, he is entitled to security of tenure so that he preserves his independence, such as they tried to do in here with the Speaker a few weeks ago, sir. That must be maintained in relation to the judiciary, so that when John Citizen goes before the court, he knows and he feels that he is not going before a court that has political connection, political control. And I'm saying to the people of this country, it is about time that they understand it. That this practice of appointing judges by way of contract between the judge and the state, they can get across there and hear me. I am going to let them know this is my public view. That a judge loses potentially his independence when he is on contract. A judge properly appointed is not a creature of contract. He is a creature of permanent appointment, and so it ought to be. And I make that comparison. I made the point in relation to the classical public service. It extends to the judiciary, but it is more critical in relation to the judiciary. Nobody goes before a public servant to be sentenced or to receive a fine. Nobody goes before a public servant for that, but you go before a judge to be sentenced, to be tried. And that is why it is so critically important that when you go before that judge, the citizen must know and feel that that judge is entirely independent, and independent from political control. It is not to say that all governments are wicked and that they will seek to exercise control over the mind and the dispensation of the judge. But justice is not done unless it is also manifestly seen to be done. And if a government is seen to be parceling out contracts to judges, the government is equally seen to be controlling the judiciary. And that is the most unfortunate constitutional state in which this country finds itself, when its judiciary, when its judges are now subject to a handout. And that handout is a contract. I ask this government to cease the practice and to let the judiciary maintain its dignity, integrity, and independence from political control. And I'm saying that a contract is a form of political control over the judiciary. And it really besmirches a judge. If a man is able to go before that judge and hears, look, he got a contract. He got a contract from the government. No. We're being unfair to the judiciary. We're being unfair to our judges. All of us came along in a system in which judges certainly enjoyed that independence, that they knew that they were going to the age of 65 in the High Court, and that it ought to have been at their option. That's another issue that arose. It ought to have been at their option whether they wanted to continue for another 2 years. But this practice now of parceling out contracts, like if you kill a pig and you're parceling out the pork, judicial office is above that kind of dispensation. Now, all that I have said, Your Honor, seeks to defend the virtues of law. And these virtues of law affect all that I have said here this morning. Those virtues, clarity, the law must always be clear. Certainly the public servant must know what is his status clearly. There must be consistency. The rules that apply to one public servant must apply to all public servants, certainly in terms of his appointment and his tenure and the extent of his tenure. There must be justice. There must be fair treatment of all public servants. And I have had the privilege to refer to the unfair treatment of several public servants in this country. And that unfairness of treatment has occurred because one suspects that sometimes even a government is not aware as to the status of public servants, that they're not there by virtue of employment by a government, but they're there by virtue of appointment by the head of state. And I used the word sacred earlier. And if there's to be any sacredness in the service of a public servant, it is that that public servant is appointed by the president, by the head of state. And there, already at the stage of appointment, you have insulation from political control. In other words, the government, a public servant can say, the government did not give me this job. The head of state, through recommendation by the Public Service Commission, gave me this job. And he can operate for 30, 40 years and never have contact with a politician. And if he has contact, he can say, I've never been controlled by a politician. I have implemented policy, but ultimately I have been beyond control. Stability. I use the word stability in relation to the English inheritance, and I don't mind conceding the virtues that we have inherited from the past power that used to be around here. And we should be thankful for having existed in a system that has been reasonably stable, that has been characterized by order. And of course, there's equity, there's fairness, there's fair treatment of all, classically within a public service. I regret to say to you, though, sir, that over the past few years, we have found a public service that has become diminished, ravaged, if you wish, by a government, beg your pardon, sir, by a government that seems to believe that its survival is based on control. One may want to introduce the government to the word respect. Seek not to control the public service, seek to respect the public service, as many governments have done in the past. And I want to say this to this government, that past governments have paid a heavy price for interference in the public service. I'm not going to name any, but the examples are there. You interfere in the public service as a government and you pay a heavy price. It is not that I don't want the government to pay that heavy price. So I do want them to pay that heavy price. It would be a little late to change. So that to reward public servants in this country now by implementing what the Public Service Act anticipated or contemplated, to enfranchise them with permanence after 3 years, it is a good thing. It is a late thing, but it is a good thing. And I repeat, but it is a late thing. Perhaps the government is going to be punished for the lateness of that thing. Perhaps the government is going to be punished for failing to respect the public service over the last 7 years and believing that to come, as the Prime Minister came this morning, with a whole basket of things. The Honourable Prime Minister spoke of the detectives' allowances. There's a promise to give the officers in uniform some benefit in a regrading exercise. There's the reference to the senior constable, which we oppose, by the way. And then the proposal in relation to the nurses. Yes, we are about to settle with the nurses. Let me say that to the police officers again, and I want to be clear on this, that our proposal in relation to ranks within the police service will not include any status or any rank called senior constable. That in a redrafted hierarchy, there will be nothing as patronizing. That is tokenism. That a man serves, I saw a gentleman 40 plus years, and they made him a senior constable before he goes home. Cold comfort for the loyalty that he has given to a public service department, a police service. And let me say to the public that that will not be a part of a new police service under a Democratic Labour Party government. That there will be an entirely new structure given to the Barbados Police Service. It will be dignified and respectable in terms of remuneration, and it will be fair in relation to promotion, to ranking. It will be modern. We don't have to speak of uniforms, but if we do, we will say to the government, and we will say to a new Barbados Police Service, that the uniform may have to look modern. Some of us are aware that the Trinidadians effected change to their uniforms some time ago, to something more comfortable and something that is congruous with its human and physical environment. The Trinidadians made that change. And if there's any country to emulate, perhaps we may emulate what was done in Trinidad. It will not be like naming classes grades. It is more serious than that. It is about an image, and stereotype and substance are often connected. So that those are the concerns we express in relation to this amendment this morning. As I've said, it doesn't reinvent the wheel. It is just a promise made by an earlier piece of legislation which may be politically too late. And that is unfortunate for the government. I want to say, in the presence of the learned Attorney General, that the case King against the AG is a reminder to him and to this government that there are three categories of public service that must continue to receive protection, certainly in terms of the dignity of their existence and their independence. These three categories were mentioned by a former Chief Justice in the case King against the Attorney General. I want this government to understand that there must be no interference in the judiciary. Certainly, as I said, and I repeat, contractual appointment constitutes interference. And I do not have to describe any other kind of interference that may take place, although I'm not saying that it takes place. But when you put a man on contract, that is a definition of interference. So this government is reminded that the case King against the Attorney General is a reminder, not only to this government, but to all governments, that there are three categories within the public service that must be allowed to function with independence. In that case, they refer to the judiciary, they refer to the Auditor General, and they refer to the Director of Public Prosecutions. I have had occasion in recent times to express regret that this government, through its most prominent voice, admitted to communications of inquisition. I'm choosing my language very carefully. communications of inquisition with the Office of the Auditor General. It is the Auditor General that feeds this Parliament through the Public Accounts Committee, which has been crippled by this government, by telling me how to set an agenda, and if I want to investigate Hope, they come in there and vote me down and say, we are not going to allow you to investigate Hope, we are telling you what to investigate. They close it down. I say to the people of Barbados, this government closed down the PAC. You can imagine you have Your Honor?
On the course.
I'm staying on course.
On
And
a
I'm
point
reminding
of,
this
on a
government.
point of order, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I know she's listening.
Yes, member for St.
Mrs.
Michael, South Central.
Thank you for clarifying who's she, because one might not know. Sir, the honourable member, the honourable leader of the opposition is misleading this honourable chamber. The government of Barbados, and certainly none of the government members that sit on the Public Accounts Committee, closed down the Public Accounts Committee, nor did those members seek to say to the chair of the PAC what the chair could discuss. What occurred was that government members said that there was a standing existing agenda that had not been completed, and agreed, government members and other members agreed that the standing agenda should be completed before other items are added.
That
Thank
is
you.
to say the same thing. That is to say the same thing. That I went there as the new chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, exercising my discretion as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, and said that there was a report fresh before Parliament in relation to the Hope Housing Project. It was submitted by the Auditor General. I met with the Auditor General. The Auditor General came to the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, and I said this will go on the agenda. And the members of the government came in there, and I repeat, and said that they will not have that investigation before another investigation was to be completed. And since the honourable member has sought to give further clarity to the issue, let me say this, that other investigation so described had gone before the court. And those who are lawyers will understand that when a matter is sub judice, no other body will touch it. It was before the court. And it was unresolved before the court. I have said here, if I have to teach law, I'm going to teach it. And so in exercising my discretion as chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, which is a watchdog on government spending, the members of that committee came there and said that they will not allow an investigation into Hope unless another investigation was completed. We all know what they were doing. The public knows what they were doing. They were seeking to delay and to frustrate an investigation into Hope on the pretext
Raising a point of order.
Honourable
that they
member for-
wanted something else that was before the court.
It is against the standing orders, sir, for a member to impute improper motives to another member or a committee of this Parliament. The honourable member has way across the line to impute seriously improper motives to members of this Parliament and the other place in a way, sir, that was he not in here might leave him open for an action for defamation. I ask that it be with Mr. Rakoff, sir.
Honourable member
Your
for
Honor.
Christchurch South.
Yeah.
Could you withdraw those comments, please?
You mean as to a history of what took place? I am saying to this Parliament,
What you're speaking about has nothing to do with the subject that is being discussed.
as Your Honor
Right.
pleases. Close that discussion then, sir.
So
Yes.
I will ask that you just withdraw your comments, please, from the record.
Your Honor,
Or I ask for those comments to be withdrawn,
which comments in particular, sir?
to be struck from the record.
Which ones? Or you order that?
Well, I asked you to do it, sir.
You ask, I'm not following you, sir.
I asked for you to withdraw the comments that were made earlier
Which comments, sir?
in relation to the Public Account Committee
Your Honor, I gave a history. I'm not disobeying you, I'm saying what I said, and I could repeat it. I say that we constituted the Public Accounts Committee and that the members
Sir,
of the
if the comments that were made by you are deemed misleading, I ask that you withdraw those comments.
Well, let me say to you what I said, sir. I said that I set. Thank you, sir. I said to you, sir, that I set the agenda and I had intended to.
But the honorable member for St. Michael, South Central,
And Christchurch East.
They both stood up and set the record straight for you, sir.
And they have set the record straight with reference to what document, sir? Have they brought the minutes? Have they brought the minutes, sir? The minutes would disclose that I set.
Do you have the minutes with you?
I don't have them. They don't have
Okay.
them either. None of us
Okay
has
then.
them.
Okay then.
And we can send for the minutes. And the minutes will reveal, Your Honor.
But
I cannot distort
well,
the
I
truth.
ask that those comments be struck from the record. Please continue, sir.
I am obliged to you.
And
I will
stay on
continue.
the subject.
Thank you, sir. I will
Thank
continue.
you.
I will continue. Perhaps the clerk can go and get the minutes, but let us press on, sir. And the point being made was that the High Court of this country said that there must be no interference with the salary of judges. The High Court said that there must be no interference with the salary of the Auditor General. So important as are those offices. And there was a third office, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Today, Your Honor, it remains a matter of stain and regret that a prominent voice in this government sought clarification from the Director of Public Prosecutions as to the conduct of a case that went before the law court of this country. That, in my humble and respectful submission, constituted interference with the office. And when the Learned High Court ruled that those three offices are sacred, that Learned High Court ruled in protection of something that remains sacred. The Learned High Court ruled in relation to three sacred offices that must remain beyond the control of the political directorate. And so the point extends with consistency to the public service. And Your Honor, today we are here about the public service. And I'm going to repeat by way of summary in closing that this government has been unfair to the public service in this country. It has been. And to plant contractual functionaries at the head of the public service is to undermine ambition within the public service, and it destroys morale within the public service. And I will add this, Your Honor, that there has been a lot of expressed frustration at the head of the public service, or let me say within the leadership of the public service, that there has been unprecedented sick leave in the uppermost reaches of the public service as a result, and I will state this broadly, as a result of governmental activity. You can use the word interference if you want. And at the lower levels of the public service, there has been and continues to be frustration in relation to this government's reluctance to honor financial obligations due to many, many, many persons across the public service, so that when this amendment comes today, this amendment is not a panacea for all the problems that have occurred in the public service, to come and tell them on the eve of what is now obviously an election, oh, all of you will now get 3 years. It does not solve the problem of interference within the public service. And I'm entitled to make that comment, that this government has now built up a record of interference within the public service. This government has built up a record of a refusal to pay financial entitlements to many persons within the public service. and that this legislation is no balm, it is no gloss on the turbulence that has occurred in the public service over the last 7 years of famine. And I'm saying, Your Honor, all too late. All too late that this public service has enjoyed a record of dignified service rendered to the people of Barbados. That dignified service has been disturbed by a tyrannical government. That is my submission, Your Honor. And so, Your Honor, I close in saying that today's amendment is nothing more than legal compulsion as anticipated by the Public Service Act a long time ago. But it has met at an intersection of political expediency. And today's exercise is no more than political expediency, designed to attract a public on the eve of an election. Again, I say those two words, too late. Too late. Too late. And there must always be a nexus between economic performance and public service, political service, if you please. And that this government has continued to tell the people of Barbados that there has been economic prosperity. If there has been all this economic prosperity, why have the public servants been so badly treated? Beg your pardon. Why have the public servants been so badly treated in terms of their financial entitlements? Why? Why? Why was the police service promised over 2 years ago an increase? Why did it come 2 years later? In a buoyant economy. And Your Honor, I reserve the right to establish that nexus between the economy and the political administration of things. And to say that this is a government that has continued to squander the people's money when it sees fit so to do, and when it is compelled to honor people's financial entitlements, it finds it difficult so to do. The point must be made now. The point needs to be made now, sir. That in the event that people fear in this country that there's not enough money to go around, the government finds it possible to spend and spend and spend when it wants to, and Carifesta is a prime example of that. We are still on the matter of political administration, and the monies that ought to have been spent on political administration have been spent on matters that we could have done without. And the legacy of this government is contained in a giant chicken pen at Newton. Drive up there, sir, and when you're approaching Gildan, look to the left, and you will see this government's legacy. You will see the testament of this government in Barbados. That is and continues to be government's most prominent contribution in terms of capital works to this landscape. No one is sure what it is. No one is sure when it is going to be completed. It can't have been completed at this stage. We understand that it is to be pulled down and to be rebuilt. I'm still on the public service. And on the matter of the public service, Your Honor, I ask the question again as to whether that monstrosity up there was built subject to tender. And if the information is that it did not go to tender, and if the information is that when constructed, it will cost in excess of $50 million, this government cannot now claim to have met the rules of the public service, certainly in terms of awarding contracts, only if tender has gone out. I know the name of the company that got it. I know the name of the company, sir. And that has been a breach of the rules within this public service that government now claims to be coming to protect. And it has happened, Your Honor, it has happened in a climate, in a political environment, in which the public servants at senior levels and middle levels within this administration have not been allowed to function. It has happened in an environment in which there is political rule over the public service. That is the point that needs to be made. So the government can come in here and say that they're amending the Constitution. They can do it every month. They can come and say that they're amending the Constitution. The government needs to mend its political ways. The government needs to acknowledge and to respect the rules of public administration, certainly in terms of the way it functions in relation to the spending of money that are public service monies, that are the taxpayers' money, that can only properly be spent according to the rules. This government has breached the financial rules over and over again. This government has maltreated the public servants in this country. This government, as I said before and I'll say it again, has been unfair to the public service by planting contractual workers, and I call them contractual workers, at the head of the public service in breach of the Constitution, in breach of the law. That is why what comes here today is no consolation to any public service. It is yet another political machination intended to capture votes in a few weeks. Too late. Too late. Your Honor, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, sir. Honourable member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Shakespeare said, sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Honourable member, please.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Speaker, he's disturbing himself, not disturbing me. Today we debate a piece of legislation that demonstrates this government's human-centered approach to governance and to national development. This government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, believes in work, believes in workers, and believes in ensuring that workers in this country are able to benefit from their labor, are able to benefit from the work and their contribution to national development. And one example of that approach, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is one that the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast referred to. She spoke to the national minimum wage. And you know, it is interesting that the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, the current Honourable Member for Christchurch South, spoke to hearing about the national minimum wage for the first time in Parliament. He signed a document in 2018. He signed a document in 2018.
I'm going to stop him. Point of
Honourable member for Christchurch. So.
Does the Honourable Member have this document that he claims that he signed? Does he have it? They get up in here and tell me that I say things without a basis. The point of order is that he's misleading you. It's a document in the House. Show it to the Honourable Deputy Speaker. Show it to him. Y'all can't come in here and tell lies every week and with impunity.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can't be misleading you because you also sent the document.
Oh, you.
And at page 31 of that document, there is a bullet point that speaks to, and I know you don't quote from screens, but it speaks to establishing a minimum wage of $8 per hour and extending that across all sectors of the economy, so that the secondary school students who the Honourable Member spoke to would have understood, even at that 15 or 16-year-old level, would have understood that when you say you extend it to all sectors of the economy, you are talking about a national minimum wage. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South signed that document in 2018 with that point in it And so I am happy that we are able to demonstrate that there was a time when he understood what good governance was about, what good policy was about. We do know that people put their hands to the plow and turn back. And the Bible speaks to what happens in those cases. The honourable member has a certificate or diploma in theology. He understands those things very well, those who put their hands to the plow and turn back. I do not wish it for him, though. In spite of his noise, his fury, I believe that he can always turn back again. And even when Judas was about to do what he was about to do, you know, Jesus really wanted him not to go in that direction. But Mr. Speaker, in the past 7.5 years, and I noted that the honourable member, I keep saying honourable because I have really to stay focused.
Your Honor,
based
Your
on,
Honor, Your Honor, Your Honor.
Honourable member for Christchurch.
Is the honourable member allowed, even by way of disguise, to,
Is there a point of order, sir?
issue language that constitutes an insult? That's the point of order. Is it contained in the rules that the honourable member is allowed to use the language of insult?
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm not sure that honourable is an insulting word, but I'm not sure if the honourable member...
It is said with sarcasm, and I am not going to allow you in 2025, at the end of 2025, to insult me in here. I'm not going to allow it.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker,
continue, sir.
Honourable member, I'm not sure where the sarcasm is, but the honourable member indicated that the last 7 years were years of famine. That is what he said. He joined us in giving within months of coming into office. He joined us in giving to the public officers of this country a pay increase. Mr. Speaker, in those years of famine, the honourable member joined us as we established the position of Custom Officer 4 to improve the lot of a number of workers in the Customs and Excise Department. The honourable member joined us in those years of famine to do that. The honourable member joined us, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in those years of famine to reduce income tax rates on the workers of this country, to reduce the level of income tax in this country. The honourable member for Christchurch South joined us in that. He joined us as we criticized the Democratic Labour Party for either withholding or reducing the reverse tax credit. He joined us in suggesting that that was not the right thing to do. And he agreed with us, because he was with us, that we ought to restore it. And that we did for the workers of this country. And we went further, Mr. Deputy Speaker. He joined us as we set up and established the compensatory income credit. He was in love with those policies and proposals, because the compensatory income credit put money back in the hands of persons at a certain level of earning. Money that they would have spent in taxes. Government indicated, and he was a part of that once government had the financial resources, it would give back to the people of this country. I am tempted to do what he does, but I'm not going to sink to that. So I'm not going to let anybody know whether or not he is in the chamber or whether or not he is leaving. But, okay. That's not sarcastic. I take it in good faith. The honourable member has to go to court. That's fine. The honourable member, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was also part of the administration that agreed with the negotiating team in the public service to give the lump sum payment in the first year, and then 2 years of increases in salary. The honourable member was also he didn't just sign the manifesto that spoke to the national minimum wage. He agreed. He was part of the government that agreed not at $8 as said in the manifesto. We went further and established the national minimum wage at a rate of $8.50 per hour in this country. For the first time, he agreed with us that the Democratic Labour Party had the opportunity to do it and did not do it, and that this government had done the right thing at the right time by establishing a national minimum wage. $8.50 with a sectoral rate of $9.25. Now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if one listened to the sound and the fury, one would get the impression that this government has something against persons who are responsible for our security. The honourable member spoke about the fact that persons were not treated well and two police forces. Well, those who are old enough to know will recall that it was the Democratic Labour Party, while in office, that created 2 police forces in this country, that demoralized the police force, where one police commissioner had persons on a list to be promoted, goes on leave, another is appointed to act, a different list, and then we end up in court for years over a situation where the Democratic Labour Party and the commission that they set up work to destabilize and demoralize the Royal Barbados Police Force, as it was called at the time. This Barbados Labour Party has established the position of the Special Constable, and the Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, has been very clear that we are going through the process, because unlike the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, we are not doing things off the cuff. We are going through a regrading exercise. And out of that exercise, we expect that those who do work and do work at certain levels and face certain risks and have certain responsibilities will be appropriately graded, and out of that grading will be appropriately rewarded. This Barbados Labour Party government is also the government, when we set up the national minimum wage, determined that security guards, because of their work, because of their hours, because of the risks they face, ought to have a rate of pay that was different from all other sectors in this country at the time. And so while we set the rate of pay at $8.50, for security guards, it was set at $9.25. This is a government that recognizes that those who work to secure us, to keep us safe, must be recognized and must be rewarded. This piece of legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, includes some reward for some of those officers who work hard day and night and day to ensure that we have a level of security in this country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Barbadians were treated today to the rantings of one who appears so scared at the possibility of a pending election. And what we were treated to was an attempt to place on record what could be considered alternative proposals. Now, I would wish public officers, particularly those identified by the Honourable Member, to remember the Democratic Labour Party some years ago. They promised all kinds of things to teachers and to police officers. They promised duty-free vehicles. Nothing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has come out of those empty promises. So when people stand in here and talk about telling lies, I define lying as saying things that you're going to do when you know you're not going to do them, and then when you're in a position to do them, you don't do them. I consider that to be lying. The Democratic Labour Party, in my humble opinion, lied to the people of this country. And the people of Barbados, including and maybe especially the public officers of this country, must remember that the Democratic Labour Party does not keep its promises to public officers in this country. Does not keep its promises to public officers in this country. This piece of legislation is an example of a government who not only respects the work of public officers in this country, the very good work of public officers in this country, but is prepared to come to this chamber, is prepared to bring a bill before this House, a bill that requires a constitutional majority, is prepared to come here and to enact legislation that will allow security of tenure for those who have been in positions, acting in positions for 3 years or more. Barbadians embrace the idea, the concept of security of tenure. And it is really disgraceful for any honourable member, including the honourable member for Christchurch South, to poo-poo the matter of security of tenure. I am not sure what is going on in his brain, but I am sure that Barbadians generally, Barbadians by and large, want to know that they have some security of tenure. We were treated to a treatise, well, not a treatise, that is probably elevating it. We were treated to a stringing of words together. And I think that is maybe appropriate at this time. We are stringing Christmas lights together. And we have some nice lights, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in Spikestown. You ought to come down and come into Spikestown, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I know you normally use the Ronald Mack Highway. You are a man with roots in St. Peter. I encourage you to come to Spikestown and to Farley Hill. But we were treated to a stringing of words together and an example given of one person who went into the private sector and another person who went into the public sector, and that the public sector is a place where you enjoy security of tenure. Now to come with that kind of example and then seek to poo-poo a piece of legislation that is intended to provide that security of tenure for persons who have been acting in positions for 3 years or more. This Barbados Labour Party will never poo-poo security of tenure. And so we are happy, and I'm happy to support this bill today that calls for, the bill actually says that those persons are deemed, well, once it is passed, will be deemed to be made permanent members of the public service of this country. That is the kind of government that I'm a part of. That is the kind of government that I'm happy to be a part of. That is the kind of government that this country has the opportunity to support. A government that is interested in people, a government that is interested in their peace of mind, a government that is interested in their security of tenure. We are saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that if you have been acting for 3 years, unless something is wrong with your supervisor, it means that you are needed in the job. And the legislation already, existing legislation already recognizes that 3 years in a job, unless it is project related. So unless there is a specific project that you're working on that has a specific life, a start date and an end date, then outside of situations like that, it means that you are needed in that position. And so if you are in that position for 3 years or more, and on the January 1st of 2026, you will be deemed to be appointed to the position. This Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has also demonstrated its human-centered approach to development, to people, to work. Since we've come to office, we have ratified a number of international labor organization standards, international labor conventions. We have ratified 2 occupational safety and health international standards, Convention 155, Convention 187. One is the safety and health, one is promotion of. But you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we were about to ratify these conventions, do you know what we recognize? We recognize that the Democratic Labour Party, even though these standards were agreed at the ILO some years ago, neglected to bring those standards to be laid in this honorable chamber. A government, a party, the Democratic Labour Party, and the Democratic Labour Party in government, not interested in bringing before this honorable chamber those important and significant international labor standards to be made public documents in this chamber as called for by the International Labour Organization Constitution. A government, a party that has repudiated all that Honourable stood for. He was the one who took us into the ILO in 1967 or 67. And the government, the party that he left, well, this party that exists now is probably not the one he left. But it has the same name. So I am bound to refer to it as the party that he left. Has no interest in international labor standards. I had to come here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as part of this government and lay in this honorable chamber about 20 standards that the Democratic Labour Party refused to bring to this chamber. But we have ratified, not just laid in the chamber, because laid in the chamber is a requirement under the ILO Constitution. Ratification is a different matter. Ratification is when a government decides this is a standard that represents progress for my people. We ought to be living by this standard. We ought to be implementing this standard in legislation and in practice. This Barbados Labour Party government has ratified a number of international labor standards and have determined that we will live by these international standards. We have brought to this honorable chamber, not to the chamber, we have ratified Convention number 149. This is the Nursing Personnel Convention, and we have done it in close collaboration with the Barbados Nurses Association. We have had lots of input, we have had lots of encouragement, we have implemented this standard, and all that we've been doing as a government is to put into effect the provisions and the requirements of this international labor standard. We have also ratified Convention 189. The Honourable Member for St. George North was very involved in that convention, and I remember long before I was a member of government or a member of parliament, hearing and becoming aware of all the work that she and the Barbados Workers Union was doing with respect to domestic workers. And we have ratified that convention. We have also ratified the Convention Against Violence and Harassment, Convention number 190. This Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is one that is committed to workers, committed to their protection, committed to providing them with the opportunity to be producers in this country, recognizing their humanity, recognizing that work is about dignity, recognizing the concept of decent work, and doing all in our power to make sure that that decent work is recognized. That is the reason why this bill is before this honorable chamber. This is testament to the nature of a Labour Party. A Labour Party established since 1938 that still holds fast to its roots, still holds fast to what has guided us over these more than 80 years. This Barbados Labour Party remains committed to the workers of this country, workers in the private sector, workers in the third sector, and from this bill, workers in the public sector. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we recognize that this bill is not and cannot be a panacea. And I heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael South talking about fighting windmills. I thought that after his exposition, very eloquent exposition, he is a poet, he is a speaker. After his eloquent exposition, I thought we'd come to the end of fighting windmills. The Honourable Member for Christchurch South, finding nothing of substance to oppose in a bill, seems intent on resorting to fighting windmills, seeing windmills as people that ought to be fought. I do not know where the idea came from that this bill is seen as a panacea. It was not said, there was no intimation of that. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast was very clear to talk about all of the other processes that are taking place, that have taken place already, that will serve together to lift, to continue the process of lifting the public service, to continue the process of recognizing the worth, the value of our public officers who serve us so faithfully day after day after day after day. This bill is not a panacea. This government is not introducing this bill into this House as a panacea. But Mr. Speaker, if I use that language, when a person is feeling ill, that person will from time to time rub down. You may be a little too young to know about rubbing down with Vicks, but your relatives in Maynards, I know they know about rubbing down with Vicks. You will also drink a lot of fluids, and you might also take a Caffeinol. You may be too young to know about Caffeinol. You might take a Caffeinol or a Contact C for the cold, because you recognize that you gotta fight it using a number of different processes. And that is what this government does. This government recognizes, you know, I wish that the Honourable Member for Christchurch South had stayed with the government. I also wish that while he was with us, that he used to attend Parliament. Because if he did, he would understand what good governance is all about. Good governance is about making determinations as to the various policy interventions that are needed to address any situation and progressively implementing those policy prescriptions so that the ultimate goal is realized through the various policy prescriptions, through the various activities, through the various systems that are put in place. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill is one that public officers appreciate. In spite of the sound and the fury, the public officers that I've interacted with over the past week or so, after they became aware of this bill, they are happy. Many of them are gone beyond happy. They are excited. I, like the government that I'm a part of, recognize and the government recognizes that out of policy prescriptions, there could be challenges. The Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, shared with us, as was the case in 2020, I think it was when we had another version of this process and this bill, there is built in a process of appeal, because whenever there's a situation where a line is drawn, that is to say, a date is set, there will be persons who believe this is not fair to me. This government, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is about fairness. And it is about fairness, especially when we are dealing with human beings. And so there is in this bill an understanding that those persons who may feel that they were not fairly treated will have recourse. And that recourse is laid out in this bill. There is the appeal to our head of state, our president, and public officers who believe that they could be treated better are encouraged to use that medium. Many did last time, and a significant portion of those who used that medium were able to be successful in their appeals. And I say to public officers who, after this process, may feel hard done by, there is the process for appeal. A law must set certain parameters, but there must always be the provision for persons to have access to justice. And this government is about giving workers in this country access to justice. And so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to be a part of a government that is human-centered in its approach. I'm happy to be a part of a government that recognizes the dignity of work. I'm happy to be a part of a government that recognizes the dignity not just of work, but the dignity and inherent humanity of workers. I'm happy to be a part of a government that is so determined to do good by the people that it is prepared to come to this honorable chamber and eventually to the other place to ensure that those workers in the public sector who have been acting for 3 years or more will be able to have their tenure regularized so that they can enjoy security of tenure, so that they can go about their lives, they can go about taking care of themselves, they can go about taking care of those who depend on them with a sense that their work, their labor has been validated and that this government is interested in their welfare. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And this afternoon, I also rise to support the bill, and in doing so, to place on record my appreciation for the significant and measurable improvements that we heard mentioned by the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast. and the honorable member for St. Peter who just spoke, measurable improvements that have been delivered to public servants in this country during the past 7 years. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise today not only to place on record my support for the bill, but to set the record straight. Because too often in this country, memory seems to lapse, and it does so conveniently. And when we talk about the conditions about public servants, we really must speak plainly, because we have noted the measurable improvements that have been listed during the last 7 years, but for 9 years preceding that time, preceding 2024, not April 1st, but 2024 in June, we saw public servants receiving absolutely nothing. Not a raise, not an increase in allowance. As a matter of fact, far from increasing allowances, I hope that we all can recall that public servants were among John Public who no longer had the non-taxable benefit of allowances when they filed for income tax. Nothing under the previous administration. Nothing to recognize their service, nothing to recognize their sacrifice. 10 years practically of drought, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And yet in just 7 years, this administration and government has delivered more improvements to public officers than was delivered for an entire decade. Now, if I were minded to be like the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, I will start to shout and say, let the country hear it! Let them hear it! Salary increases, delivered. Expanded POLTA eligibility, delivered. And minimum wages. They might want to rubbish it. Minimum wages increase. Now, I sat and I heard with interest that the honourable member for Christchurch West was being credited with being the birthplace or the birthing house of the minimum wage. I listened with interest, and as was recognized, the honourable member for Christchurch West sat there with a poker face, because the honourable member, unlike me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, properly recognizes that there are certain balls that you should not play. But what I recognize with interest and why I was smiling to myself is because the honourable leader for the opposition continues the trend that is the pattern that was established by the last government, the last party in government, a party that continued to ignore what workers and their families were asking for. So it comes as no surprise that because the honourable member for Christchurch West, and I do recall the occasion as well, spoke very positively about the need for people to have a minimum wage, that the leader of the opposition would disregard the fact that for decades, working people and their families had been calling for minimum wages. The union, and I can speak for certainly one in the labor movement, one that I have the distinction of leading, I know that that union meets with the political parties or those that it considers to be the major players in the political landscape of Barbados before elections and on occasion during periods between elections when we are called upon to give our input. And for decades and decades and decades, to inform manifestos, that organization in the labor movement that I lead had been asking, among other things, for minimum wage. And in fact, we have on record resolutions going to the Cabinet Secretary, to the Barbados Labour Party, to the Democratic Labour Party, calling for minimum wages, and it did not start with me, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It started with my immediate predecessor, who is still alive, and it started with his predecessor, who was a member of the opposition party. So I really make these statements because some, in trying to make political jabs, others would do so at the expense of what is truth, do so at the expense of what they know to be a circumstance that is important enough to working people and their family that they, through their representatives, had been advocating, not just for years, but for decades. But while others continue to talk, and while others continue to jab, this government seeks not to get it right every time, because simply, Mr. Speaker, there are limitations to trying to get it right. And that requires resources that we must continually work through different forms and fashions to be able to deliver to our people. But this government continues to cut through the level of discontent that is in the public service. And I didn't say the level of discontent that was in the public service. You would note very carefully, I said the level of discontent that is in the public service, because we must make it clear that while progress has been recognized during the last 7 years, progress does not mean perfection. There are still gaps, and we must not pretend that there are not gaps. The issue of contract workers is one that remains a vexing issue. The issue of workers not getting acting pay in a timely manner, not being paid those who are on temporary appointments, and not receiving other entitlements remains a vexing matter. As recently as last week, Tuesday, while I was sitting in this honorable chamber, I got a message coming in to me from a young lady who has been in temporary employment for the last year and 11 months, but who had not received payment since May this year, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And you know why she didn't receive payment when we investigated and unraveled it? Not that she didn't work, and not that nobody didn't know that she didn't work, but the ministry responsible, the parent ministry, did not send down her information to the Ministry of the Public Service so that they could respond to it in a timely manner. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are situations that are not acceptable, and there are situations in which the people who are responsible should be held accountable. Because it's okay for us when we sit cushy going into work and knowing that our salary is assured, and then we do so, we go into work knowing our salary is assured, but not doing the things that we need to do to make sure that other mouths can be fed in this country. So there are situations like that that breed discontent within the public service. On the subject of contract workers as well, this government, and I don't say so proudly, but it must be recognized, that this government continues to engage some people under contracts for service. I have a fundamental problem with it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we can accept that when you were under an IMF program, initially you had to look at different ways to do things to still put bread in people's mouth, even if you could not offer the long-term security as full-time employment would have offered. But I think, for instance, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of the 360 workers, now the 720 workers, still after over 5 years, there are on the contracts for service. Not good enough, because we all drive around this country and we can see that there is a need for those workers. We can see that there's also a need perhaps for augmentation of the workers doing that particular job. And even if not augmentation, or reorganization of how those workers in NCC and the others over in MTW should work together so that this country, the objective of keeping this country clean, does not only remain an objective, but it is actually one that we can say is achieved, because we are falling short in that area. But why it remains a vexing issue for those workers and for people who represent workers is because it denies them a lot of things. It denies them the opportunity for security, the opportunity to go at Christmas time and secure a loan that can come out, the payments can be deducted from their salary, because they are under no clear contract where the financial institutions know that they're going to be able to get their money in a timely manner, weekly or bi-weekly or monthly or anything. And it is also a vexing issue because we have spent time, at least in the last 3 to 4 years, talking about the sustainability of the national insurance system. How is it that we want to make a system sustainable so it continues to be the lifeline for workers, and those workers are not assured that lifeline? Now we may argue, oh, but we paying them and they can go down to NIS and they can make their payments into the system so that they have the guarantee and they have that lifeline. But what we have been wrestling with for the better part of the last 2 to 3 years is having NIS, triple S, having that social security system recognize that these workers are actually on the contracts for service. NIS still does not treat to them that way because NIS knows that when they look to the employment rights legislation and so on, there are certain conditions that must be satisfied if a contract is not to be determined as a contract for service, and that in every instance, they do not meet the criteria. So they're denied it, and then the country suffers from having more people feed into the social security system to make sure, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, that when you reach the right age of retirement, there is something for you, there is something for me to draw from. And these are things that are breeding discontent in the public service that we must continue to address. So yes, nobody says that progress makes perfection, but progress means simply that there are steps being taken to do the right thing. And on that note, the one on contract workers in the public service, that's one that must be addressed and addressed shortly. There's another sensitive matter that has workers shaken up, especially those who work in high security environments. We heard recently about the introduction of TVT testing and ID tech testing. And Mr. Speaker, the BWU has always supported, and I personally have always supported, any endeavor that seeks to improve national security in this country. We have always defended to worker security, and that is why this was not introduced willy-nilly. It took over 2 years for the discussions around the proper introduction, because they had started some pumpawan down in the port. But the proper introduction of TVT testing, it took over 2 years for those discussions to reach a point that you say you roll it out. You roll it out not knowing that it is perfect still, but roll it out to see where the kinks are and where it can be improved. So to protect the dignity of workers, therefore, Mr. Speaker, we spent some time, for instance, ensuring that there was an appeals mechanism that was solid enough to stand the test of time if during the course of doing the TVT or ID tech, there were issues that arose that needed addressing. So the rollout has begun, and we in the labor movement remain right there, not running, not hiding, not pretending to have some looking glass into the future on gaps that will emerge, but given the assurance that where gaps emerge, that we will be there to close them, because we intend to make the system work for all and to achieve the level of national security that every Bajan would be proud of and would want us to work towards. Mr. Speaker, it is for that reason, that same commitment to bring in balance to situations, to bring in fairness to situations, and working with sober leadership, that we did not attempt to block the recent bill on economic diversification. This has been a charged debate, a charged national conversation over the last few days. But democracy, sir, is not a museum piece. It is a living thing. And I believe that debate is healthy, whether it is on this bill, a previous bill, or whatever bills come to this chamber. Debate is healthy. And we must not feel offended when people start to question things and when people start to challenge things. Because when people question and when people challenge, all it tells us in the first place is that we were not clear enough. And even if we thought we were, that we need to go back at it to make sure that even if people don't agree, they can at least appreciate the effort that is being taken. So yes, I have been approached, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to weigh in on that. And I don't intend to step beyond the walls of the current bill that is being debated to get into that heavily, except to recognize that clarification was attempted. And Mr. Speaker, as I said before, we are not spiritual workers or ritual specialists that will stand from this point, especially in areas that might fall outside of our immediate scope of expertise, and say that X is going to happen or Y is going to happen, but we stand here waiting to examine the facts, follow the debate, and assess the implications for working people and their family. And it is on that basis that what matters now as it relates to the public service, what matters now as it relates to issues around economic diversification and so on, these require disciplined implementation, clear metrics, clear time frames, and public accountability. So the bill, where it contemplated job creation and labor market impact, which will not only impact private sector workers, but public sector workers too, these things must be measurable, because either jobs are created or jobs are not created. Either quality is improving or quality is not improving. So just in passing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would want to say that the same framework that was in place under the IMF program, where there was a birth monitoring committee in place, that the advisory council that we were discussing in the last session of this parliament must not be a ceremonial body, but it must measure, it must report, and it must function like the birth committee, as I said, with periodic public updates coming to this country, coming to Barbadians, so that we can see what is working, what is not, and what needs to be adjusted. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have every confidence that this government that has shown that when things are not as it had committed or are not as it had planned, that it would course correct, and I believe that it will be done in this instance as well. But back to the bill in question in full, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we need a functioning performance management system. We cannot continue to return to this parliament every 3 or 4 years or so to create another appointments framework. And for the avoidance of doubt, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am not suggesting that people should be appointed regardless of performance. But what I am suggesting and advocating for, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that we have to work towards a methodology that recognizes or seeks to implement a system that recognizes tenure, respects seniority, and treats workers fairly, so that we don't have to be coming back with a bill every year, so we can do this on promotion, and we can recognize acting this way, and so on. We also need stronger health and safety protections across the public service. And even as we anticipate the conclusion of the job evaluation exercise, because that's the only reason that public servants have not been settled in terms of a salary increase for the period that should be effective April 1st this year. So even as we anticipate the conclusion of the job evaluation exercise, which is the precursor to the finalization of agreements towards those increases that we anticipate will come as well, Mr. Speaker, I'm recognizing that we all must recognize, not just me, that outside of the money, the health and safety of public servants is one where we continue to find too many efficiency gaps, and one that must be closed quite soon. Mr. Speaker, there is more to be done. There must be more that this government commits to doing. And we must not just commit to doing more, but we must show actively that we are working towards doing more and bringing more meaningful, positive change, not only to the public service, but to their families, which would also encompass people in the private sector as well. But, Mr. Speaker, I could not stand here or sit in this honorable chamber today and recognize that notwithstanding that there are problems, that significant progress hasn't been made. I would not sit silent, therefore, Mr. Speaker, so that I be confused with any of those who, Honourable Member for St. Peter, are being disingenuous enough as to pretend that nothing has changed when positive change continues to be evident. Let no one try to rewrite history by shouting hard and by presenting half-truths and so on, because positive change and progress has been made, and none of us can erase that is the fact. This government has sown seeds of improvement into the lives of working people and their family. I was also intrigued before I close, because I'm about to close, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I see you watching your clock. And I was also intrigued when the Honourable Member for the Opposition mentioned, as it relates to police and nurses, the noises that the opposition has been making that has caused the government to respond. I am not interested in defending whether that is so or not. But what I was more intrigued about is the fact that even if he thinks that's the case, the government responded. And the government then wait until after 9 years of no salary increases, no allowances, parliamentarians getting beefed up while the rest didn't get anything at all. And it did not wait for about 30,000 people to march the streets of Barbados, all on one occasion. I don't mean 5,600 times. I mean 30,000 people on one day, from north to south, west to east, joining hands and joining hearts in opposing a government that would not listen, and even where it was making clear mistakes, would not seek to course correct. I'm happy to be a part of a government that does not follow that. And I'm therefore happy, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that as a member of this Parliament and as a member of the Labour movement, to know that I can continue to work to ensure that our best effort is not only something that is vocalized, but our best effort is materialized in the hearts and the homes of working people and their families. So, Mr. Speaker, without any further input, I support this bill. I'm obliged.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this honourable chamber be now suspended for lunch until 3 p.m.
The motion is this House be suspended for lunch until 3 p.m. All those in favor, please say aye. All against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This House is now suspended until 3 p.m.